To Community Forum, Easton's show about important events, important people, and interesting topics. Your host is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen, and I welcome all of you at home to enjoy a most interesting and provocative interview with two of our most distinguished members of the Easton community whose families go back generations. And so I have Leo Harlow, and to my immediate right, Leonard. So we'll start with Leo. Tell me a little bit about your background and your family, and then we're going to go into your growing up in Easton.
Well, my father grew up in Easton, needless to say, and my grandfather was very, very prominent in Easton. He had a barber shop in Easton. He also had one of the first drugstores in Easton. At one time he owned most of it, Main Street, and he was a barber by trade, and he had a barber shop in Boston that had 13 barbers, 3 manicurists, and 2 shoe-shining boys on State Street. And he did most of the representatives and senators' trims every morning. And it's hard to believe, but at that time you'd get a trim for 5 cents. And he had something like 290 individual shaving mugs on the wall with an individual brush for every one of his customers. And it was, he was a very interesting man, but unfortunately he died when I was in my first year at Northeastern Grammar School. But I can always remember him because he had beautiful, beautiful white hair with a part down the middle and big waves. And every spring he gave me the honor of cutting off all my hair, and it lasted all these years.
Well, he must have had some interesting stories about the legislators.
Well, unfortunately he did, but I didn't get them. My brother Jack can tell those stories.
I see.
And we'd be more than willing to do it, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting. I'd love to have him on the program. And so you grew up in, and you went to Northeastern Grammar.
Yeah, but I didn't go to Oliver, and I went to St. Patrick's, and then I went to Coyle High School. And the reason was that when my father died when I was 10 years old or 11 years old.
Oh my.
10 years, 11 years old. He died in December 18th in 1945. And my 2 aunts, who were both Sisters of Charity, came up, and apparently the discussion about me was that, why aren't your children going to Catholic schools? My poor mother, who didn't have 2 cents in her pocket. And so I apparently somehow, either I was a free ride at St. Pat's in Brockton, or we had both of my aunts, who were nuns, were both Sisters of Charity, and St. Pat's was run by Sisters of Charity. So
I see. I
may have gotten a free boat there, I don't know. Because at 10 years old, you don't ask those kind of questions.
No.
And then I went to Coyle. I earned the money to go, even if I didn't want to go there. I was going there, so. In those days, you didn't question what your mother told you to do.
That's right, or your aunts.
or anybody else who was older than you were.
So Ed, give us a little background on your family. I know we've talked about it before in another program, but just give us a brief sketch.
I was born in Brockton at the Goddard Hospital. And when I was 6 years old, we moved from Brockton to Easton. And that's when I lived at 17 Columbus Avenue and went to started second grade in the grammar school. And Leo and I were almost next door neighbors, so we grew up together for a few years. He lived on Hayward Street. And then he moved away and lived near the grammar school.
Right, right beside it.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't know Leo after that, but he and I used to play at the Frothingham Park together back in the early 40s.
Well, tell us a little bit about your family background also.
My parents?
No, how far back you go in Easton history.
Oh, in Easton.
I mean, it goes back to the 1700s.
Oh, way back. You want to go way back there?
Well, no, just give us a little brief.
Well, it has a lot to do with
picture.
Easton, as it turns out, because the Leonards, historically, back in the 1650s, started the iron industry in this country. The first successful ironworks was in what is now Rainham. And right here in Easton, the shovel shop, the Langwater Pond, there were forges there. The Leonards were involved with that. Fred Ames lives in Alephalette Leonard's house there on Pond Street.
Yeah, now that's an interesting first name. Could you pronounce it very slowly?
I believe I pronounced it correctly, Alephalette.
Alephalette.
It's like
Leonard.
Eli, Eliphalet.
Oh, okay, Alephalette.
Alephalette,
Yeah, Alephalette Leonard.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there were three of them.
Mhm.
The first one was like in,
Not all named Alephsus.
three of them had the first name Alephalette.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Captain James Leonard came up from Taunton with his knowledge of making iron, and he and his Alephalette #1 operated the forge down at what is now Langwater Pond, where the dam is. And then that was turned over, and Alephalette Leonard the second was making steel out there on Elm Street Extension. And then Alephalette Leonard 3 had the forge across the street from on the island between the shovel shop and Langwater Pond, and that's the house that Fred Ames lives in today.
Right, from 1694.
Well, his was 17 something like that.
Oh, I thought it was 16.
No,
But anyway.
17. Yeah.
Okay, 17.
Yeah.
So there was the first one, then the son, and then the grandson.
Yep.
Yep, and all named
Alephalette.
Alephalette.
Took me a while.
That's a man's name too, right? Alephalette?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Ed, bring us up to speed here. When you and Leo were attending the Northeastern Grammar School.
Yep.
What sort of memories do you have? I know
Well,
it's quite a long
I remember
ways back.
when I first went to the first grade, I walked from Columbus Avenue down to the school, and Miss O'Connor was a second grade teacher, and so I had to do something at the desk while the class went out for recess. So when I finished up, I didn't realize I had to go out to recess, so I went home.
Good move.
Poor Miss O'Connor came back and there was no Ed Leonard around. But anyway, that was one thing I remembered. Then we had Miss Williams, second grade.
Third grade.
Third grade, yes. Miss Fitzpatrick was the fifth grade, and Miss Harvey was the sixth grade.
Yes,
And,
I had her too.
Harvey store.
And the strange thing was that when we came back, we all loved Miss O'Connell. Remember? Everybody
Yes, yeah.
thought she was.
Well, I liked
and
all
she
my
was.
teachers.
Yeah, I did too. But
Yeah.
she was young and
I
beautiful.
even liked Miss
compared
McFadden.
to Mrs. Kennegelly and Mrs. who were about 109 at the time and had been teaching for many, many years. But we all asked what happened to Miss O'Connell, and a lot of people don't realize that in those days, back in the 40s, if the woman who was teaching got married, she automatically lost her job.
Right.
And Miss O'Connell got married and lost her job.
I thought it was when the woman got pregnant.
No,
No.
you lose your job immediately.
And they couldn't get the job if they were married.
No.
And they would lose it if they got married. So a lot of them got married but never told anybody.
Yeah, right. and now I don't know if you remember, but Mrs. Mills was the first married teacher that we had.
She taught fourth grade for me.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Miss Fitzpatrick taught fifth grade.
She might have been my fourth grade, Miss Mills then.
Yeah, Miss
She was
Mills.
mine.
And
Okay.
Miss Fitzpatrick was your fifth grade.
Fifth grade, right.
And were we in the same room, Miss Harvey's room? Yeah, we must have been in Miss
Yeah, we
Harvey's.
must have been all through grammar school. Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause that's
Mary
what-
Harvey, brother of Charlie, who had
Yeah.
the meat market.
The best
the corner-
market in town,
Yes.
accordingly.
Wasn't
But
it?
it depended which church you went to. If you went to one of the evangelical church, it was Milton Anderson. If it was across the street was another Anderson, but that was the other church.
Yeah.
And then the
Lutheran.
Catholics went to the Lenahan because they had Lenahans and McMahons and Harveys.
But everybody went to Harvey's
For
meat
me.
market. Yes,
me.
I mean my grandmother did. My mother did. Yeah, and she wasn't Catholic.
No, but I'm
No.
just saying, in the early years, the
Yeah.
grocery store, people don't realize there were 24 or 5 businesses on Main Street when we were young kids.
Yeah.
There were 24 or 5. The only reason why I know that is because I moved to the main street when I was 9 years old. We got the house that I still own that's right next to the Northeastern Grammar School. And the interesting thing about going down, it was a whole new world. So where I used to go to the park every day, now Dick Anderson and Alan Grant and I would go down into the pond and build one-man rafts and go around the pond at 8 years old. Of course, a mother today would be totally panicked if her son were doing that. But in those days, the kids went out at 8 o'clock in the morning, came back for lunch if they really wanted to eat, and most of the time they did, and came back for supper. Isn't that how you was?
Well, pretty much. My next door, I remember across the street, corner of Haywood Street and Columbus Avenue. I lived at 17, but before that was 15, and Charlie McMahons and his brother Frank.
They lived down on the right.
No, they lived on
They-
Hayward.
They lived on the corner of
No,
Haywood
no,
and
they moved. Originally they lived on Columbus Avenue on
Oh.
the right-hand side where the Hurleys later bought the house.
Oh,
No, they were on the other corner. I was on the corner where Hurley was.
And
Let me tell you
kids
how it
growing up,
really is.
Don't you remember the Flynns lived in that house and then they moved up the street?
No,
was that Jean Flynn's house?
Billy Flynn, Mary Lou Flynn, and
Had a younger sister, Jean?
No, they had, that Gene Flynn later came and moved into Haywood Street and took the boys, the 3 boys, Joe and.
Yeah. But I know Charlie McMahons was in my class, and I always knew that he and his brother Frank lived on Hayward.
Yeah, but that's
No,
their
but
parents.
wait.
My sister used to babysit for them when she was.
Uh-huh.
You know, I used to get 25 cents an hour to babysit. Do you have any idea what it costs
I
today?
want to come back to where they lived because I don't agree with either one of you.
Well, I know they lived in the house of the Lennons and that the McMahons. The
We're talking-
McMahons lived where the Hurleys moved to because when they lived there, I think they might have been in an apartment because they built a house on Haywood Street subsequently.
You know what's interesting to the listening audience? We who are beyond a certain age have crystal clear memories most of the time of the past. I mean, how would you remember that the Hurleys lived there and then they moved, or that the Flynns lived wherever? Because that's what was important to us. And I think that's what sticks with us. Now, do we remember what we had for breakfast? Probably not, right?
But we were going back to, you could spend all day out playing in the yard as long as you're home for supper.
Yeah,
And I'm telling you, Charlie McMahons, the father, had a food store,
He had a meat store.
a meat store in Brockton. He had a son.
butcher shop.
He had a son Charlie and a son Frank.
so that's when
and this-
Charlie became a meat cutter.
Right.
Yeah, Mrs. McMahons, when she wanted her son Charlie to come home, and he was out in the neighborhood somewhere, like we're saying, you disappear, but you're home for supper. She would go out in the yard and holler at the top of her lungs for Charlie to come home. And he might have been with the Flynns up Columbus Avenue, 14 houses. But he would hear her because she was that loud. And that's what I remember.
Yeah. And the other thing I remember was that most of my guests on growing up in Easton have said that they remember that when the streetlights came on, that was the signal to go home.
Oh, okay, when it got dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was also the whistle at Steadfast Rubber Company would blow
Yes.
at 9 o'clock, and that was.
Well, that's when
better
you
be
lived
home
down,
by
that's when you lived
Huh?
down on the
Yeah,
Main
that's
Street.
right.
I couldn't hear it up in Columbus Avenue.
Yes, you could.
Yeah,
Well,
and so times were different then. And what were other escapades that you enjoyed and remembered that probably wouldn't be allowed by the helicopter parents of today?
Oh, well, when I moved down Main Street, as I was telling Edward earlier, Alan Grant and Richie McNamara and
Dick Anderson.
Richie Anderson, Ape Anderson, we used to call him, because he was a gigantic. I remember, big man.
Yeah, he was in our class.
Yeah, he was a big man though compared to my 108
It's interesting
pounds,
that
maybe.
neither you or Alan Grant or Richie Anderson graduated with us. You were in our class, but you
Right.
didn't graduate in our class.
Oh, okay.
But,
Yeah.
but we would go down to the pond and we would build one-man rafts up at, there was an old lumber mill that had been abandoned
What
on
pond?
Fred's Pond.
Oh, okay.
Or the Langwater
Langwater
Pond.
Pond, yep.
In the pond in Pond Street.
Yeah.
And we would take the lumber, 16 foot by, I think it was 16 by 12 by 2. And they were actually that way, and they had been seasoned and
Yeah,
aged for
right,
years.
right.
And they were, and the air was going through. So we'd take 2 of those and cut 2 pieces of 2 by 4 and nail them together. So
Now you had a
then
raft.
then we'd put a little seat on top of that 2 by 4. That would be right in the middle of those two
Okay,
by 4s to
okay.
keep. And then, of course, then we'd each have one, and then the next day the big kids would always steal them. So
What did you use them for?
to go up, to pedal all around the ponds.
Oh.
And today's mothers, and I was only 9 years old, today's mothers would never allow their kids to be doing that. But I mean, we went out to play in the park every day when we were young too.
So, and how did that contribute to the kind of person that you both grew up to be?
I think it gave you independence, and well, for one thing, the older kids, right, always taught. I mean, like games like marbles. We were talking about this. What about marbles? We learned that from the older kids. His older brothers used to play marbles, and we, of course, they did. And everybody in town, the time between the end of March, I think, and the 1st of May, when it was a little muddy, you couldn't play baseball and you couldn't really do much. We played marbles. And I don't think I've seen a kid with marbles in the last 40 years.
It's interesting you mentioned marbles. Lee Williams, in one of his articles, talked about playing marbles up in Furnace Village. And I went to one of the luncheons they had at Lindsay's restaurant recently. And Lee kind of ran that. And I had read about his marbles, and I had found some that I had left over. So I brought them down to him, and I said, Lee, I don't think you've got all your marbles. And I gave him some of mine.
Oh, that was good. That was good. Well, I just saw him get the Chafin Award from the Easton Historical Commission on this past Sunday. And he gave, as he always does, a magnificent, articulate response and little speech. And I must report, he does have all his marbles. He really does. And he's 85, and so he's really doing really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he keeps himself very active.
Yes.
And that's what we all need to do.
Well, if you don't move, you stop moving.
Yeah, move it.
You've got to keep moving.
Move it or lose it.
Yeah.
Right?
What's that?
Move it or lose it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Move it or lose it.
So
That
what
was the one funny thing that I remember about my mother. Used to always walk, and she used to say to me, "How come nobody in Easton ever walks?" This was probably in the 60s and 70s, because they all got cars. I said, "Mom, they don't walk anymore."
Yeah.
But I mean, it was funny that I don't think there were probably 4 or 5 cars on Haywood Street when if there were that many.
I don't know. A lot of bicycles.
The Lynch boys always were working on a car. I don't know if they'll get one to run, but
Well, yeah, your next door neighbor was Metrano. He had
Right.
Metrano Chevrolet.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't dumb,
So he had a car.
of
oh
course.
yeah.
Yeah. And in those days, even when I was growing up, families only had one car. So I remember my mother, if she needed the car on the day that my father had to carpool to the Brockton Edison with Carl Sindel and Donnie Hill, then she would drive them and then go and pick them up. That's the way it was. And she was, on that day, she was carless, but it was okay. And one thing I want to go back to is those 24 stores on Main Street. It seemed to me, I don't remember 24 stores when I was growing up, but as I recall, it was long before the malls, long before.
Oh yeah.
And so all of a person's needs, food, paying your bills and all clothes and all kinds of stores
But
were
think of this.
there.
Think of this: that O'Connor's news store had 4 to 5 people who that was their job. That they raised a family working in that little store, which is now
Imagine.
huh?
Farmer's daughter.
Farmer's daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, and they raised their families, that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Well, some didn't have families, like Bob Samuelson.
He did. He had a mother.
Oh, he had a mother, that's right. He lived
used
with
to
his
take
mother.
care- Yeah, he had to take care of his mother. I mean, in those days, people didn't have money or
No.
Social Security or things that they have today.
Right.
People don't understand that. They, you know, all these people who boo-hoo socialism forget we have Social Security,
We do.
which not one of them would give up
Right.
if, you know.
And and that was President Roosevelt, Franklin.
Yeah,
Who brought that?
and he wanted socialized medicine too.
Right.
And Medicaid, which no adult that gets it would ever give up.
Medicare.
Medicare, but no adults
No.
that gets it would ever give it up.
Right.
But it's socialism.
Exactly. It's what Bernie Sanders calls democratic socialism. And he patterns that after Sweden and other Scandinavian countries. And one of the misnomers about Sweden, my background is Swedish. I go there every year to see my relatives and my friends. And they are big capitalists, the Swedes.
Oh, yeah.
But they have a culture that from the 1800s that says that you should care for your fellow person.
Right.
You know, in other words, we're
Christianity.
going to make big companies and big corporations work for the people. Now you hear Elizabeth Warren echoing that now in the president as a
But I
president.
mean, that has but little to do with Easton. But with the 24 stores is exactly the reason why they were there, because there were grocery stores. There was
Right.
at least 5 grocery stores on Main Street.
Yeah. So-
And you wonder,
yeah.
and then, and I don't know if you remember this, when First National came in and they took over that store, and then all the little stores eventually.
I was aware when they came in, but
Wasn't there A&P too?
Yeah,
yes,
that's what came in, A&P,
and Harveys.
First National.
Right.
But when they came in, a lot of the smaller stores, the other grocery stores gave up.
When you mention that people didn't have very much, it was before Social Security and Medicare and so forth, but they had enough food, and they had clothes. They may not
Right.
have had a lot of clothes, but
They
nobody.
didn't have many clothes because
No.
most of the houses have very small closets.
Yes, right, and
Small closets.
but I'm having a senior moment.
I remember you didn't have to leave your house for a lot of things. You'd have Camaras with their fish
and meat.
Fish and meat. You had
Cookie Callahan.
Cookie Callahan.
Oh.
There was a little basket in there and some cakes and whatever.
Who would deliver it to your home?
Right.
I remember him.
Then I had coal delivered into our basement.
Yep.
in the coal truck.
Yeah, you
The ice
the ice
guy.
you put the
yeah,
ice card
yeah.
out.
The rubber mat in his back and the tongs and.
Yeah.
Mr. Redden,
Yeah.
Mr. Redden in his ice truck.
I remember.
Well, he had the oil also.
Yeah.
I remember the Iceman coming to my grandmother's. She had an ice box, and
Yeah.
it was a tiny little guy, and I felt so sorry for him because he had to put this huge big chunk of ice, and the tongs on it, and he was really hunched over, and of course I know why.
Yeah.
But he came, and of course the ice was all packed with hay to keep it from melting.
Yeah.
And he drove it was a horse and wagon.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
still remember him. And often my grandmother would invite him in. She says, oh, my grandmother had nothing. And she was a widow when my mother was 6. She became a widow, my grandmother. And she would invite the ragman in and say, oh, come and sit down and have some supper. You must be hungry. And, that was the immigrants'
Well,
and the way of responding.
That was why Easton was a good town. I remember my mother got sick when I was probably 8 years old, and she went to the hospital for 3 weeks, and she farmed us out to neighbors. We lived with neighbors. I lived with the Tynans, and my brother lived with the Downies, and my sister and brother went down to my aunt's. But anyway, but they brought in food every day. And your neighbors took care of you. It was really very, very kind.
Yeah, and there's a resurrection of that now in town. There's a group that do that, make food and run errands and so forth.
Which
it's
is
a
good.
It's a brigade. I think they call it the Giving Brigade or something like that. But I wanted to mention that I know that my mother, who grew up, she was born in 1911, and she said, we didn't have much, but none of us thought we were poor.
Yeah, right.
Because everybody was in the same
Everybody
boat.
was poor.
Everybody was poor. Right. And they would have to create their own entertainment. So my grandmother had a piano, a player piano.
Yeah.
And so they would come over, they'd roll the rug up and put their rolls in and dance in high school, and somebody would be playing the player piano. Yeah.
You ever remember the May basket?
Oh, yes. I do. Tell us about it, Ed.
Well, it was funny because what a May basket was in the Mays, you'd want to throw a party in May and you'd get the kids together and they'd donate candy and peanuts and other stuff and put it in the basket. You'd take it to a friend's house and put it in their front porch and knock on the door and run and hide. They'd come to the door, they'd see the basket, and then they'd have to find you. You'd end up going in and having a party and play spin the bottle. That was the part I didn't do too well.
You didn't? Why?
I was nervous.
Too shy.
You wouldn't play?
Oh, yeah, play. I don't know who I kissed, but
Yeah, for those of you at home, spin the bottle.
there's
You
a blank spot right there.
You spin the bottle. A guy spins a bottle, and whichever girl it lands on is the one he's got to kiss.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, in the May baskets, I remember doing that growing up. And we would take some kind of a small cardboard box, maybe 5 inches by 6 inches, something like that, and we'd put crepe paper, line it with crepe paper and the ruffles around the edge, and then we'd take some cardboard and make a handle,
Right, right.
and then we would fill it with candy and cookies, but also flowers.
Oh,
So-
we forgot the flowers. I think.
We
So-
never had the flower part.
No, you guys wouldn't.
Maybe dandelions, I don't know.
But there were Johnny jump ups, and is that right? Johnny jump ups,
I don't know.
and
It's your story.
I don't know if the daffodils were still around that time, but the violets. But there were lots of wild violets everywhere, and I think probably we just picked a lot of them and put them in a little water, and that, and then we would run like hell. Excuse me. But what we did was we did it on neighbors' property, and there were never any parties. Too bad we missed that part. But I know we had a lot of fun
No,
doing
we
it.
used to always contact the mother of the house.
Well,
to
somebody
make
knew
sure
it
that-
was gonna
Huh?
happen,
Yeah, that she would be accepting of bringing the kids in the house.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, the other thing that was funny, we never locked doors either.
No.
To this day, I don't lock my door.
Well, I do. I mean, I live alone, so I do lock my door.
But even people who lived alone back in those days.
No, nobody did.
ever
No,
locked their doors.
no.
I mean, everybody's house was your house in a way, but
Yeah.
you respected that.
Yeah.
You'd knock before you walked in.
Another big
Right.
part of our life growing up was the Frothingham Park.
Oh, yeah, big part.
And I know a number of the interviews that you've done, Frothingham Park becomes a focal point.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you did there, and what were some of the fun things you remember?
Everything the park had to offer.
Yeah, especially the hot dog roast in the middle of the summer.
I don't remember
You
that.
don't I remember that distinctly. That was a big.
But I
affair
remember
for all
on the
kids that
jungle
lived
gym,
around there.
I remember
Huh?
playing the jungle gym with you.
Yeah, right.
I got a broken tooth one day.
Yeah, they don't.
That-
Right, they don't have that anymore.
And there was the big boulder
Well,
in the
if you
center.
if you didn't fall off that jungle 2 or 3 times, you weren't even
You weren't
shouldn't
trying.
you weren't even trying.
Right, I remember the jungle gym. Yeah.
And then there's the
And-
swings and the rings.
The rings,
and then
I
Go
remember. too.
merry-go-round thing.
Yeah.
And of course the tennis courts. And the baseball field, the football, and the bubbler. I drank gallons of water out of that bubbler.
Right?
Yes.
That was good water back in those days.
For those of you who don't know what a
Really
bubbler
good.
is, it's a water fountain, but we all say bubbler, don't we?
Yeah, okay, water fountain. Yeah.
From a certain age, we say bubbles.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, in Frothingham Park, kids from all over the town came, even kids from South Easton. They'd ride their bikes up from
I didn't
Center
realize
Street.
that, yeah.
Yeah, Cedar.
Do you
well, no.
remember Sue Wood at Frothingham Park?
No.
She was the director of
I remember
entertainment
Mo
at that.
Mason.
Do you remember playing Capture the Flag at Frothingham Park?
Yep.
Yeah, that was, the path through the park was the teams would be on either side, and
Yeah.
the flag would be way down the end of the football field, way down near
In the woods.
Center Street,
Yeah.
and you would have to try to sneak in. You'd go in a different way, trying to get the flag and bring it back to your side,
Yeah.
the opponent's flag. Not an easy game, but it involved almost everybody that was in the park at the time.
At the time, yeah.
Right. And when we were kids, there was always a baseball game going on.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe 2 or 3 of them.
Well,
American
pickup
Legion.
games, right?
Yeah, pickup.
Everything.
Yeah.
That was the great thing. The parents stayed home where they belonged,
Right.
and the kids went out and played in the park.
And there were 2 fields, actually. There was the major
yeah,
field,
yeah.
then there was the one over in the back.
Yeah.
Over near Sonny Pomeroy's house.
There you go. Curtis Pomeroy, yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about it was that, of course, in those days we didn't have these nice white balls, and we didn't carry these big bags with gloves and gloves for your hand. We were lucky; we had a couple of gloves and a baseball bat. But the ball was literally used until it would no longer.
And then sometimes we'd sew it up.
You know, but it would, yeah. And then we'd put the black tape on.
Yeah, there you
so
go.
we'd be playing baseball at night, and this is. When I think back on it, and we all loved to play. If you didn't get in the game anyway, I'd go play tennis.
Black friction tape.
Right, right.
That was
And-
before
and-
duct tape.
Yeah, and when you couldn't even see, the guys who were in the field would say, "We get our last, we get our last." I said, "You can't see the ball." So wonder they didn't get killed. But it was so funny. We're gonna get our last. I said, "You can't even see the ball."
Yeah, you must have, I've heard stories that people, get a lot of cuts and bruises and even some broken limbs occasionally.
Sure.
And parents, though, were very tolerant of all that.
Well, it's
Okay.
part of growing up.
Right. Yeah. It was interesting when you said the independence that you got. And also, I think, the confidence that you could do whatever you wanted and be on your own. And
But the other thing was that the older kids taught you how to play the game. And if you picked it up, you could play with the older kids. If you didn't pick it up, you had to keep playing with the younger kids. And, seriously. And you knew where you stood. I mean, I used to bring books a lot of times because I knew I wasn't going to get picked because I was not a good hitter. And I was a fair fielder. I'm not a great fielder. And I was not fast. So, I mean, the two things are really... People, and I teach CCD to this day, which I don't know why I do, but I do. Anyway, I always tell my kids, if you're not the fastest kid in town, forget being a pro athlete. And they look at me, what do you mean? I said, if you're not the fastest kid in town, forget, do you
Yeah.
realize that every town in America, these kids are 10 years old, I said, every town in America has Little League Baseball? Did you know how many people live in this country? 365 million? Think about that for a minute. And they look at you,
yeah.
dumbfounded.
Right.
But when we were kids, we all went to the park, and if you got picked to play, you played, right?
Well, I didn't play that much baseball at the park. I played a lot of tennis. My baseball was hit the bat out in the middle of Columbus Avenue.
Yeah, when you can do that.
Somebody would throw the ball to you, and you'd hit it, and if it was a pop-up, the guy that caught it would then go to bat.
Right? Yeah, I remember that.
If you hit a grounder, then you picked it up and you rolled it up the road, and the bat would be laid down
Right.
crosswise. And if the ball hit the bat, then you'd get up. Playing hit the bat, I got a shiner. My mother had to take me to the hospital in Boston because I'd broken my nose. I had a shiner for 2 weeks.
Dangerous game.
Yeah,
that
that was-
dangerous game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but you didn't mind it, I'm
No,
sure. And you probably went right back to playing.
It gives you a social interaction at that, and
Something to talk about.
not somebody telling you what to do, what not to do. You just did it.
Right, I think that's a problem today with parents. They tend to tell the kids what to do,
Yeah,
kind of be the general in the family. And we didn't really have that. I remember going to Langwater Pond, which we always call Fred's Pond. I was 8, my late sister Karen was 7, and my mother said 2 things. Because I lived at the end of Seaver. So you go up a hill, down a hill, and you come to Main Street. And she said, look both ways when you cross Main Street, and don't skate near the thin ice. That was it. I was 8, she was 7, all by ourselves with our skates.
Yeah,
And
but
we were-
everybody else in town was down there skating anyway.
Exactly, right. And there were no parents, absolutely no parents.
Thank God.
Thank God.
But
But anyway, I wanted to get back to the Frothingham Park because a lot of people, some of the newcomers in Easton, wonder why we talk so much about the Ameses and so forth. Well, it was Mary Ames Frothingham
Right.
who
Right.
donated set that park up. And
The year we were born.
is that right?
34?
Yeah.
Okay. And I believe her husband had died? Or
Well,
had-
actually, it's 1930. I also like to say 1934.
Oh, okay. Okay, because he died, and she dedicated it to his memory. And there's a huge rock in the playground area, which has a big bronze tablet on it, dedicating the park to Louis Frothingham, who was a state senator, I believe, and also a congressman in Washington. So anyway,
And also
What
a
would
big
we-
contributor to Thayer Academy.
oh, really?
Really? Yeah,
Oh.
He was a big guy.
Yeah,
Big
he
guy.
was very well known, and quite a gentleman. And but what
What's the,
people need
what's
to
the, you're talking about Frothingham Park. What's the motto of Frothingham Park? It's printed on a big bronze thing as you come in from the
oh,
Day Street side.
I confess, I don't know.
Huh? You don't know?
No.
See, you don't really love Frothingham Park.
Okay, so what is it?
To set the cause above renown, to love the game beyond the prize.
Yes, Val Moscato often said that. Yes, yeah. But anyway, so what would you have done without that park if Mary Ames Frothingham hadn't created it?
Well, I spent a ton of time in the woods. I love to go in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
We used to, I don't know, did you used to go up to
Manny Morgan's?
no, yeah, we were in Mandy Morgan's woods all the time. But did you used to swim up at
Maliff's?
Maliff's?
Yes.
Not Maliff's, the skinny
The
dip
Flyaway?
side. Yeah, Flyaway, did
Oh,
you?
no, I didn't go to Flyaway. I went to Maliff's.
See, but we used to go through the woods to Flyaway. And I can remember very distinctly, I had to be maybe 8, and we had scarlet fever. Remember they would,
My brother almost died of scarlet
yeah,
fever.
and they would quarantine you. You couldn't leave the house.
Right.
So it was a really hot night. It might have been in the 80s at 9 o'clock or 90s. And my brother Jack decided that all the boys are going to go up swimming. And at
Who
that
had
time,
scarlet fever?
huh?
Who had the scarlet fever?
I think I had it,
Oh,
but
okay.
I went anyway.
Oh, okay. You didn't have it too bad.
Oh yeah, well, I think this was the 5th week.
Oh, okay.
This
You're
is
getting over it.
Yeah, I was getting
Okay.
over it.
Okay.
So anyway, we go up at 9 o'clock, dead black, right up through the woods, like it was. I remember years later, I came back to Easton after 6 years of wandering around the face of the earth, and then I went out into the woods, and I said, "Where'd all the paths go?" Because kids must have stopped playing in the woods.
Mm.
And it's strange when you do that. When you see how. Then I went down the Ames's, because when we were young, they were pretty well kept up. All of those areas. And boy, it doesn't take nature too long to take over what's left unattended.
No, I would walk up Columbus Avenue to the end. It was a dead end.
Right.
Through the woods and go to Maliff's Pond. And that was right off of
Right.
Lincoln Street. And there was First Rock, Second Rock,
Third Rock. Right. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I got to tell you this. I was very immature, and I didn't know much about life at all. I just lived it. And I can remember Joe Carter's sister, Mary. Did you know Joe Carter?
No.
No?
I did.
Yeah. Anyway, he was pretty popular in town. His sister was a beautiful gal. And she would come out and stand on First Rock in her tight-fitting white bathing suit. And
you were
I
shy.
thought she was beautiful. I didn't know why, but I always liked women, She was beautiful.
As shy as you were.
As shy as I was.
But in those, I am so glad we had a childhood. Kids today don't have a childhood. They
No.
really don't have a childhood.
No, expound on that.
Well, I mean, we knew nothing of. I mean, both 90% of us knew nothing about sex, and it didn't even enter your mind.
No.
I mean, until maybe you were 14 or so, 13.
I was
14.
15.
15. See, but before that, you just went out and had a wonderful time. You might be playing with baseball. The girls, Alice, I can remember Alice
Mela?
Maliff played baseball with us. She played
Oh, yeah.
football with us.
Yeah, she was quite an athlete.
She was one of the guys.
Yeah, she was.
And, so, and Tracy the same way. Anna Tracy was the
didn't
same
know
way.
that.
She was always in the football game. Never thought of her as being a girl, just another player. You know,
Yeah.
and she was as tough as they came, Allison, and so was Anna. So it was
It's a different time.
innocence. It was a time of innocence. When I mean real innocence. And you know, your parents didn't tell you anything either.
So it was also a time of freedom.
Huh?
A time of freedom.
Right.
But discipline as well.
But this,
You're free, but yet there are rules, and you
Right.
live by the rules.
yeah. But and another thing I remember distinctly was during the war when we were growing up,
Right, right.
everybody went to church. Remember?
No.
You don't remember that? No, you don't. You went to church, right?
Well, I was in transition.
Oh, you probably came to Easton right after the war.
No,
right?
I came to Easton before the war.
Yeah. Right, 1940, right?
Yeah, and I went to the Unitarian Church, and I went there for a number of years until I was old enough to say I didn't want to go anymore.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But
And then
during
there
the
was
war
a couple of years I didn't go, and then my friend George Peterson from Reynolds Street, he was going to the Covenant Church on Main Street, and I had met my future wife, Terry, and she went to the Covenant Church in Attleboro.
Oh.
And I met her through George. So I ended up going to church with Pete down on Main Street, and I joined that church. So there was the Unitarian Church, there was nothing, and then there was the Covenant Church.
But when
But during the war,
right.
it was when I didn't go, I think.
But during the war, you know, all the churches were filled. And I remember that particular church, because I moved down to Main Street in 1943, and on summer mornings, they had a wonderful choir. And they would always have the door wide open. And I
They'd
would sit
sing
on,
Swedish songs. They'd sing in Swedish.
yeah, I don't care what they were singing. They were singing beautifully. That's all I care. Because my father was a really fine violinist. I mean, very fine. I mean, you're talking about your parents. We would go over to a house, and there'd be somebody playing the piano, and my father would play the violin. It would be unbelievable.
So you like the Swedish
Well,
songs?
and I would sit as a 10-year-old. I would sit up. And of course, it wafted up to.
Yeah, right.
Of course,
Up
in
the
those
hill.
days there weren't 400 cars coming through.
Right, that
Maybe-
was right
maybe
across the
6
street,
cars
actually.
went through.
It's right across the street from where you lived. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was just such a great joy just to sit there and listen. Because the other thing that I always found funny, because I remember saying when I was in first grade, I said, "Well, what did you think of the opera?" To some kid that was in the class, he says, "What?" I said, "Oh, apparently this is not a subject that I should be talking." Because my mother and father always listened to the opera on Sunday afternoons and the symphony on Saturday afternoons. And my father would sometimes pick up his violin and play right along with the first violinist.
Oh, my goodness.
And the funny story about my father was, I don't know, but were the Moans must have been
The Moneses?
in our generation.
Yes.
The Moans, the
Chicky-
Moans had the movies.
Yes.
Was Chick Moan in your class?
Chick Mones was a year ahead of me.
A year ahead of you.
Yeah,
Well,
went to-
anyway,
in the movies in his backyard.
right.
Yeah.
But the Moans, Mr. Frank Moan's wife was a Mulligan who had lived literally. That was their family home.
She was a Mulligan?
Yeah, I'm thinking something like that. I'm quite. Anyway, and she used to say to me, "They can talk about that Yehudi Menuhin and those other violinists. Your father was the best violinist ever." She said everybody in this neighborhood would just pray that he would practice. And this is, of course, she's going back to early 1900s, and
Yeah.
maybe 1906, 7, 8, 9, 10. And she said he would practice for hours, and everybody would have their windows wide open and sit there and listen to him because he was unaware of that. But
Did the Lutheran Church sing songs in Swedish?
Yes.
It's okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know, Lutherans and the Covenant Church, both Swedish churches, we like to sing. We sing a lot, and so we have a lot of hymns during the service. You know, but I remember when I was a child, they had gone over to English, but when my mother was growing up, it was Swedish, and in fact, the sermons were in Swedish. Everything in the Sunday service was in Swedish. My mother's Sunday school classes were in Swedish. I have some of the little books that they were given to read in Swedish. And she was confirmed in Swedish. And so my mother spoke a beautiful Swedish, and she wrote a very beautiful Swedish. And her older sister, Agnes, both of them. And but then it changed.
She didn't pass it on to you.
Well, yes, in a way she did, because she and my grandmother would speak Swedish together, and I would listen and hear it. And a neuroscientist said that if you are exposed to a foreign language before the age of 3, you will form brain waves for those sounds that are not in the English language. And that's apparently what I did, because I learned Swedish at college, and then I got a scholarship to the University of Stockholm for 1 year. And when I was there and I would speak Swedish, they never said I was an American. They just couldn't figure out which province I came from.
That's a compliment.
Yeah, because my mother's people came from the West Coast on this island called Orust. And for you who are listening at home, just go to snippets from Sweden and you'll see what life and the culture of that part of the world is like. That's on ECAT under my different programs. Snippets from Sweden. And then I studied in Stockholm. So Stockholm is like it's high Swedish, like it has high German, you know. And it's very
Parisian French
very,
as opposed to
yeah,
the rest of the place.
Right, very different from the West Coast. And I never learned the dialect of the island, but that's another story. But I combine those, the Stockholm and the West Coast. And so but I never was, nobody ever guessed that I was an American, which was, I was grateful for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, to get back to, I remember as a kid, there was one Sunday, I think it was the first Sunday of the month, when there was it was all in Swedish. But there was also another service in English. But they kept that tradition. And Pastor Hilmer, Anders Hilmer, he was our pastor for 32 years. And so, and of course,
that was Alan Grant's grandfather, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So
Right.
Alan was just going to say that. So Ruthie was Alan's mother, and she was one of the children of Anders Hilmer. Yeah.
His grandfather would not have liked to see him breaking into the Ames house and playing tag with Richie Anderson myself.
With you.
Oh, tell us about that. Yes. Well, I remember Alan because, for the listening audience, Alan really calmed down at some point in his life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And he became
But he was always brilliant. He was one of the guys always.
reading.
No, he would. When we were in school, and even in the 6th grade, there was a great contest between Alan and Joan Kelly and myself about the different courses, and it was crazy anyway. But anyway,
But
Alan. Years ago, there was as you came up towards the Northeastern Savings Bank, on the right-hand side, there's the sheep pasture. There was a beautiful mansion there at one time.
Right.
That the people who lived in that mansion lived exactly as they did in Downton Abbey.
Yes.
They had governesses, they had maids, they had butlers, they had chauffeurs, they had the whole ball of wax.
Yeah.
And
There are photographs of that mansion at the Historical Society.
right, but it was a great playhouse.
So you broke in?
Yeah, Alan and Richard and I would find a place where the window was a little, and then we'd open it up, and then we'd go inside, and then we would play tag, and there was 1,000 rooms. And there were more bathrooms than anything else. Of course, everybody grew up in my time. If you had one bathroom, that was it. And when we were young, there were still outhouses. Up in Picker Lane.
So there were so many rooms in that mansion that you never got caught.
Well, nobody ever cared. There was nobody.
They didn't know you were there.
There was supposed to be a caretaker there and taking care of it. But Leo McAvoy and I used to break into Queeset House.
Oh.
Not break in. We used to climb to the 2nd floor and open the window and go
Climb to the 2nd floor. Oh my goodness.
in. And the funny thing about Queeset House was we would play. They really had somebody that came in occasionally to look at it, because I remember we were all in there playing tag and running around, and we heard this voice, "What are you guys doing in there?" And Richie McNamara, who was not the fastest, probably was the slowest runner I've ever seen in my life. We're running out, and Sonny Coelho, Leo McAvoy, and myself, and the last comes out, Richie McNamara, and he went by all of us like, like he'd been shot from a gun. They said, "Richie, if you could only save that running." But he never ran like that again in his life. But of course, the funny thing about that, because I was always breaking into buildings, and Franny Silver, who was a classmate.
Other classmate.
He and I used to break into Frothingham Memorial Hall and play basketball. And on the right-hand side was the American Legion. So, I mean, if you're facing it, would be the left-hand side. So he and I would break in there, and then he'd say, "Well, shall we go over and play pool?" So this is how naive we were in those days. So Franny and I must have been maybe 10 or 11 years old. Anyway, we're over there playing pool, and the front door opens. And of course, it's Cully Palm. You remember Cully Palm,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Cully Palm says, "Why don't you guys just stop? I want to talk to you." And of course, we bolt out the back, and we go up over the hill behind there, and we come out on Lincoln Street. And we're walking along, and all of a sudden, this car pulls up right beside us. "All right, boys, get in the car." That's Freddie. So I look at Fred. "Oh boy, what have we done now?" We couldn't work it. He said, "You guys think I don't know who you are?" This calls for the station. So he brings us down the station, and he throws us in the cell. Didn't throw.
I
He
want to
puts
back
us-
up here a little
Yeah.
bit, because we were talking about being disciplined, being free but disciplined. You were free but not disciplined.
Oh, I didn't notice that part.
So for everybody at home, Cully Palm was Carl, but he was Swedish, so the nickname for Carl was Kalle. And so Cully Palm was one of 2 policemen, I think, in town, wasn't
Maybe
it?
3.
Maybe 3. That's all that we had at those
Joel
days.
Johnson
Joel Johnson.
and Fred Anderson.
And Freddie Anderson, right.
And Cully Palm.
And Cully Palm. And if you're watching another growing up in Easton, it's called The Swedish Connection. It has Barbara Peterson and Lee Anderson, who was Freddie Anderson's son, is Freddie Anderson's son, and he tells these wonderful stories about how the cops always were, they might have tried to scare the kids, but they would take, if they would put you in the back seat and take you home and say, "Never do that again." And sometimes, we had the jail, the 1-cell jail and police station on Mechanic Street, which is now.
And that's where he took us.
And that's where he took us. And that was a law office.
No,
now.
in Cully-
I didn't know you did time there.
And Cully and I, and of course Franny and I, and he puts us in the cell, and of course he left us there for maybe 20 minutes. He went upstairs, and Franny says to me, "Well, what if your mother comes out? She's going to kill you." I said, "I know it."
I got to tell you a story about Cully
And
Palm.
that was part of the culture too. There was such respect for authority because you could trust authority.
Yes.
And so you knew that if the police stopped you or if your teachers put you in detention, you were going to get it worse when you got home. Twice as bad, right? Yeah, so go ahead.
Go ahead.
I had a 30 Chevrolet when I was senior in high school. And I had Dave Gomes and Andy Miller in the back seat, and I forget who was in the front seat. But we were coming out of Depot Street to turn left on 138, and there was a Chevrolet, 40 Chevrolet coming up, and there was a traffic light there, as I recall. And he blew the light, and I had just started accelerating. I may be going 15 miles an hour. And he hit me going 45 miles an hour, dead center in the back. Ooh. It shot in the wheelbase of my car 2 inches. The shackles, instead of going down, was sticking out. His hood ornament broke off in the back, dead center in the back of my car. I had to pull over to the right. The gas tank was leaking gas.
Ooh.
My floorboard was pulled up, and I had my head in Andy Miller's lap in the back seat. We had a pull curtain in the back, and the little clip there on holding the curtain gashed his head, so he was bleeding. Anyway, the attending officer was Carl Palm, So when it was all over, Carl had to give me a ride home. I couldn't drive the car. Now, you have to know my father never wanted me to drive. He was afraid of us having an accident, going to kill somebody. And here I am, had my own car, which he really wasn't too happy with, but I used it to take my mother because she was the principal's secretary at All Reims High School. So I could use it for that, and that kind of softened it. But anyway, here I got to go home and tell my father I had this accident. And who's going to bring me home? Carl Palm in his uniform. And I can remember going up the front steps, and I said, and my father was sitting in his chair right in the living room. And I said, Carl, you got to come in with me because my father won't believe a word I say.
My father will kill me and then ask me what happened.
And my father knew who Carl was, so Carl goes in first, and my father goes, and he says, Monty, sit down, everything's okay, your son's okay, he didn't do anything wrong, and he kind of softened the whole thing for me, boy.
But that's how Kelly Palm and Freddie Anderson and Joel Johnson, that's how they were. And the interesting thing is they were all Swedes. And then
I
Joel,
never thought of it that way.
and before, I think Herbie Berglund was
Berglund,
the first police chief, and then Joel.
Yeah, and they were Swedish too.
Yes, oh yeah.
No, there were cops before that. There were two Irish cops.
I was going to say,
No, but that came later.
No,
after.
Yes.
Yes,
That came before.
Hurley and Healy.
No, two Irish cops.
Oh, okay.
Hurley.
Oh, tell me.
Well, there was Downey was a cop.
Yeah, but he was a state
and
police
Healy.
officer.
No. Downey was a town cop. And
Jack
there was a guy-
Downey?
No, there was a Downey. His father
Oh.
was a town cop, as was Mr. Healy. And the big joke in town years ago when I was a kid on Shiny Shoes on Main Street, they would say, I called up Healy and Downey came.
Oh,
And
that's,
that was a big
so
joke.
how come they lost, the Irish policemen lost their jobs to the Swedish policemen?
I
How
don't,
did that
I don't
happen?
know what that. There was also another policeman that was in there.
Who was
Weir.
Weir?
Yeah, Weir was a policeman.
Yeah, he's Swedish. Yeah, but who was the big, when my mother was growing up, she said there were two policemen, and one was so fat that he couldn't run, so he couldn't chase the kids. So, who was that?
No, that was before.
Before your
that was
time.
Before my time.
Yeah, and there were only
How
two.
old would your mother be today?
Oh, she was born in 1911.
Oh,
She'd
she
be-
was just a kid. My mother was born in
She would be 100
18.
109? Is that right?
11, and it was 198.
Oh, 18.
118? No, she'd be 100 and,
Well, she was born in 1911.
yes,
So 2011 is 100 years.
100.
Yeah.
8 or
Eight.
9.
809,
109.
yeah.
If she was born in January, it'd be 109. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be
Wow.
109.
Right,
We're going to be technical about these things.
yeah. I want to get back to Alan Grant, though, because there's so many stories about him. He used to ride a motorcycle and wear black leather and have chains. You know, it was like the Fonz of my era.
I knew Alan very well.
And here, I know, because he was a classmate of yours. Well,
No, even after he was a
my
class-
mother's sister, Agnes, married to a Norwegian named Sigurd Wiedemann. And, he was a very intelligent and self-taught man. And actually, he worked on the Manhattan Project. He actually was over all these MIT grads. He supervised them on the Manhattan Project. But anyway, but occasionally, he'd get a call from Mrs. Hilmier. Oh, Sigurd, you got to come over. You got to come over. Alan has shot out. He's used his BB gun. He shot out all the bulbs in the lamps in the house. That was one story I heard. But then, he went to a Swedish Lutheran college called Uppsala, and that was in East Orange, New Jersey. I also went there.
Uppsala.
No, it's Uppsala.
Uppsala.
See, people say Uppsala, but
That's where he got his
that's
divinity
incorrect.
degree?
Well, when my brother-in-law went to
He did?
Apollo, yeah.
Who?
Sandy Polson.
Olson?
Harold P. Polson.
Paulson.
Harold Arthur Polson, because he used to have Hap on his number plate. Yeah, he was a Brockton guy.
Okay, sure. A lot of Paulsons in Brockton. But anyway,
Alan,
yeah. And so
Uppsala.
Alan Uppsala.
Yeah.
And I remember he was a teaching assistant of Dr. Ralph Yelm, with whom I became well acquainted after my divorce. He was my theology professor, from whom I got all A's and he never gave A's. And
That's another story.
that's another story. But anyway, so he graduated. He went on to seminary.
Which was a shock to everybody that knew him.
Shocked everybody. I
Right.
mean, he was a real juvenile delinquent.
Right.
We would call him.
Come on.
Huh?
That was just
And in
having
Swedish,
fun.
we would say he was a rackare unge, which was another way of saying he was a juvenile delinquent, sort of. And but he really straightened out. And then he was pastor of our Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, which originally was a Swedish Lebanon Evangelical Lutheran Church. And he gave wonderful sermons. And he was so smart. As you said, he was brilliant.
He was a very brilliant guy.
He would stand out. He wouldn't stand in the pulpit. He wanted to be equal with everybody. He would stand in the middle of the aisle, and without one note, he would give these inspiring sermons. Nobody fidgeted, nobody looked around. People were just mesmerized by him.
Yeah.
And today at our church, we have a similar interim pastor, John Polk, who reminds me so much of Alan, because he's an incredibly gifted orator also, and he just gives you something to walk away with that you need every week. But anyway, but there's the story of a guy who was very free but not disciplined.
Right.
But then he straightened out and became very serious, and I think that was because he was so smart. And it could have been that he acted out because maybe in school he got bored, and there was no gifted program for him
Well,
in those days.
let me go back. I got to know Alan pretty well in the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really know him in high school, but he was in our class. But he told me in the last 3 or 4 years that he was a cut-up in high school. And he said, but he didn't graduate with us.
Mhm.
And Richard Anderson didn't either. And
And I didn't either.
well, maybe I could understand you, I couldn't understand him. But in high school, Mr. Warner, the principal, Alan told me this, that Mr. Warner gave him an ultimatum. He could stay after school for the rest of the school year, or he could leave. And he left and went in the Navy, and so did Richard Anderson.
Is that right?
They may have gone together. Did they go together?
I don't know.
They might
That's-
have very well gone together.
Could have
'cause
been.
They,
I didn't know
they were
I
like
didn't know they
this.
hung out together.
They were like this.
But
and
Alan
I
told me
was kind
also
of a
that
third.
he said at that time I was hanging out with the wrong crowd.
Yeah.
And they were older than him, the ones he was hanging out with. But anyway,
That's
in
interesting.
the last few years, we've had our class of 52 probably is unique in having as many people loyal to our reunions and luncheons and hung together, and still do today. And Alan joined us in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And we'd go to Lindsay's just for a luncheon, not for a reunion, but for a luncheon, and we'd have 8 or 10 classmates, including Leo McAvoy and you and Dave Gomes, and Joe
Harold
Kelly,
Bailey.
Harold Bailey, and Alan started coming with his wife Nancy. Now, we had 2 people that were probably the most devout religious people. One was Alan and one was Leo. And before Alan came, Leo used to say grace before we ate.
Yeah.
But when Alan came, Alan started saying grace.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
defer to the better
Now
man.
you're back on the hook because Alan just died recently.
He just died,
Yeah,
within the
I
past
couldn't
year.
believe that he died, because he was at the last meeting we had, and he was,
Yeah.
you know, articulate, and he looked healthy.
But
Yeah.
we had, you know, you and I have breakfast on
Right.
occasion. And we'd have Alan, we'd go to have breakfast with him last year or 2. And the last time we were there, he said he had to go for a doctor's results of a
Stay
test.
away from those doctors, they'll
And
kill you.
I think he got the results that were
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah.
And we never saw him after that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a real tragedy.
But a real nice guy, and as you say,
Yeah.
he was eloquent. He could just talk straight across to you, and you'd be impressed with what he had to say.
And he also became very humble too in his later
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
You know, because when he was young, he was pretty much of a smart aleck.
Well, yeah. Well, he was confident in himself.
Yes, which brings us back to the kinds of what our upbringing created very independent, self-sufficient, self-assured, confident people.
I think somebody that helped him was
And you
his
two are a great
stepfather.
example of that.
I think his stepfather helped him a lot. He lived up in Pequannock Avenue in his later years. And he told me, and I didn't know into the whole dynamics.
Yes,
of-
Walter Swanson.
Yeah, he said he was good for him.
Yes.
He talked to him like a
Man to
father should
man.
have talked to him.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, Walter Swanson married Ruthie, and
Walter Swanson was a great guy.
he
He
was.
was a really great
And
guy.
I think that had
And he
lot
was a
to
great
do-
singer.
Was he?
Yes, he was.
I didn't
He
know
was
that
like
about him.
45 years in our choir.
But he must have
Wow.
had a real influence on Alan. 'cause
I'm sure he did.
Alan told me that.
And his son, Alan Swanson, it's interesting because two Allens, all right, Alan Swanson and Lorraine Swanson Carlson. She's in Mansfield, and I think I think Alan is too. But I see them every Sunday at church, and yeah. So yeah, and they were. I remember Dr. Hilmier too, Reverend Hilmier. He was a very special guy too, and very sensitive and caring. And he was really
in
like,
the library every afternoon reading the newspaper.
yeah, is that
Every
right?
afternoon.
Is that right?
No kidding.
Sitting, oh yeah. I mean, he was as sure to be there at 3 o'clock, I think it was 3 o'clock. Yeah, and I used to go in and say, well, I'm in the right place.
You would go in to see.
I thought he was part of the furniture. That's how often he was there.
So you were often because you went in to see Alan Grant.
No, I was at the library.
Oh, in the library. He
In
was
the
in the
library.
library, which is another wonderful institution that a lot of people don't know. There's a reading room in the library, and
And
they
Mr.
had
Reverend
newspapers.
Hillman was there
Yeah,
every day.
yeah, because he couldn't afford a newspaper, so he had to
More
go
than
there,
likely.
right, and read the newspaper. But there are also all kinds of magazines, all types of magazines that are
Well, it's a
available.
great library.
And
Great
it's well now we know how wonderful it is, and we now have you can order books, e-books. You don't even have to go to the library. You can get an e-book and read, and they have audio books and so forth. But one of the treasures is that reading room, and it's always very quiet, and there's so many opportunities to read newspapers, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, whatever. And sometimes they have foreign newspapers there too. Anyway, well, any parting words for this
Yeah, well, I just
youngest
wanna
generation?
Add one more thing about Ames Library
Go ahead.
and the Queeset House. And I've written this, it's in one of the reminiscences, growing up in Easton. I was the caretaker of the library property outside.
Oh,
That's when Mrs. Smith, Irene Smith, was the librarian.
yeah.
And David Ames used to pay my salary in a little brown envelope with a few dollars and some change. One day, I shoveled the snow too for the front walk. One day, David took me over to the Queeset House. Now here, I didn't break in. I went in through the front door
Oh,
because
good
he had
for
a
you.
key. And I walked up the stairs through a bedroom and out through the bedroom window to shovel the heavy snow off the roof.
Yeah, well, that was when we came in. You forgot to lock it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my tie. And the library, I think I read 2 books in high school. I didn't read, I'm dyslexic somewhat, and I'd read 3 pages and fall asleep. And
Well, that's a great thing.
so I didn't read a lot of books, but I always appreciated the library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another Ames gift to all the
absolutely.
children and adults of Easton, and still is. It's grown into a magnificent, have magnificent offerings for the people of Easton. Yeah.
But you know, one more thing,
Sure.
Evelyn Foster.
Oh, Evelyn Foster, my English teacher in my senior year. God love her. Best teacher.
She was Evelyn Foster and Kay Healy, 2 of the best teachers I had there. And they had discipline.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Anyway,
for sure.
Evelyn Foster, a story with her, and I had to write book reports, and I only read 2 books. One was Toby Tyler at the circus, and I reported that twice.
And she didn't pick up on it?
Well,
She did. She
she
forgot.
kind of liked
She
me,
knew.
I think.
She knew.
I think she kind of liked me because she was the class play head of that, and she made me the lead in the senior class play.
Really?
And I had my car,
Hmm.
and before I'd take everybody else home, I'd take her down to, on Main Street where she lived.
Where did she live on Main Street?
Well,
You
the
know
house-
the cooperative bank?
The what?
The cooperative bank?
Yep.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that.
she was up over that.
Oh, okay, yeah. The cooperative bank, I used to go down there with, and make deposits. It's
Yeah.
the brick building with the Connolly
No,
Insurances.
it was a
Oh, no,
white-
no, it was
white-
around the
white-
corner, the White House,
The white one, yeah.
white one.
Yeah, right next to the track.
Right,
It's where the barber shop is
where the
now.
barber shop
Yeah,
is, right.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But anyway,
And
another
do you
thing-
know that my grandfather, my mother's father, was on the first board of directors of the Easton Cooperative Bank?
Is that right?
He was an immigrant from Sweden. He made shovels at the shovel works. He set up English classes for the Swedes. I didn't even know that. Ed Hands told me that one. And he started the Good Templar Society, which was for non-drinkers, you know.
Terrible
all
thing.
the Swedes. Imagine, I know. And then no Irish were allowed, but because they only spoke Swedish. But a lot of those Swedes dropped out.
No kidding.
No kidding. And what else did he do? Oh, he ran for representative. He didn't win, but yeah. So he was very community-minded. But his father was a judge in Sweden, and he got that kind of naturally. But he dropped dead at 53, right between O'Connor's new store and the pharmacy. All right.
Reed's Pharmacy?
Yeah. And they brought him home. And my grandmother washed him. In those days, you know, they washed him and had the wake right in the house.
Yeah, that's the way it were always done when I
Yeah.
was a kid.
Right.
But back to Evelyn Foster, I'd walk to school from Hayward Street, and then I had to go through the park to go to the high school. That was the shortcut.
Hmm.
And if it was closed, I'd climb the fence, two
Oh,
fences.
yes,
But there were shagbark hickory nut trees on that path.
right.
And in the fall, I'd pick the nuts up and put them in my pocket. And Miss Foster's homeroom class was down on the northeast corner of the building, and the furnace was in the southwest corner,
Right.
the other end. And it was steam heat, and she didn't get much steam down there, and her room was always cold. So she'd ask one of the boys in the class, because she was a pretty husky gal, if she could wear their coat. One day she asked me if she could get my coat, and the closet was in the back. So I said, sure. Well, I brought this coat in, and I mean, I had 100 shagbark hickory nuts in the pocket.
At least.
And I gave it to her, and what is this? And she started taking these out and putting them on a desk, and they were falling on the floor. Bing, bing, bing. Everybody started to break up. she couldn't imagine. What are you doing carrying these
Yeah.
nuts? And even today, I
He
have a
still
shagbark-
collects
yeah,
he still
I
collects
collect
his
shagbark
shagbark
hickory nuts,
hickory
and
nuts.
I think of her.
I think, you know, when you were telling me about doing it on
Yeah.
Hayward Street,
Yeah.
I remember you doing that now.
Do you?
Yeah, I can remember you doing that.
Yeah.
He'd bring a hammer, he'd go up with the tree.
I'd sit there,
I don't know, if you
Now,
ever,
what kind of nuts are they?
shagbark hickory,
shagbark hickory nuts.
Oh, the
have you
hickory
ever
nuts.
broken
Yeah,
one
yeah.
open?
Huh? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I
a
have
lot
in
of
my
work for
refrigerator.
very
It is a
little
lot of
meat,
work,
for
right.
very
My
little meat.
refrigerator all went along. I've got 500 nuts in my basement now that I'm working on.
Really?
Really? Oh, they're delicious. You
Oh,
ever
of
had
course.
them?
Yes, they're very sweet.
Yeah. Oh,
They're
it's
great
delicious.
nuts, yeah,
Yeah.
no
great.
question.
Well, on that note,
Okay.
I think we have to wrap it up, but
We're all
I
nuts.
would love to have you come back another time. And so maybe what you could do is make a list of stories that you didn't relate today and share with our audience, and we'll have you back. You're such entertaining guys, and I can see that you were best buddies growing up, and you're still best buddies.
Still are, yeah.
And that's wonderful. So thank you again for coming on. And I said community forum. What I meant to say was growing up in Easton. And
She has so many programs.
We haven't
she forgets
finished
which
growing
one
up
I-
yet, have we?
I hope not.
Anyway, thank you, Leo Harlow.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Ed Leonard.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. And to the listening audience, I hope that you enjoyed this as much as we have enjoyed presenting it. Wonderful stories. One of the best programs that I've done. Thank you again.
Okay, really?
And bringing alive what it was like to grow up in Easton in those days, in the 30s. And remember, it was the Depression, and people really didn't
I'd
have
like
much.
to talk about the Depression period.
Yeah, well, we'll do that another time. Great idea.
yeah.
Again, thank you for watching. Be well.